is Luffy's worst enemy? Who hates the Straw Hats so much they can't even stand the sight of our captain's face? Today, we're ranking every single one of Luffy's enemies, from the ones who mock his dream, to the ones who hunt the Straw Hat across the seas, all the way to the ones who will murder their own allies just for letting Luffy slip away. All of it to settle, once and for all, which character hates our captain the most?
Starting with him, Bellamy, the genius who said Luffy couldn't even throw a punch. From the very beginning, this guy had the nerve to spit in our captain's face and laugh at the Straw Hat's dreams. The only people worse than him are the ones who still haven't smashed that like button. But Bellamy's biggest mistake was messing with Cricket, because that's when Luffy came back angrier than a dad meeting his daughter's new boyfriend. And on top of giving Bellamy a completely free facial reconstruction, Luffy made the big bully swallow the fact that he'd been right all along. The island in the sky was real, the dream was real, and that's when Bellamy realized just how bad of a pirate he actually was. So much so that back in Dressrosa, this same bully who used to laugh at Luffy's dream ended up becoming one of his biggest fans. That's why Bellamy opens our list with just 2%. But the next one already starts to get complicated.
Because Crocodile's case is a weird one. Luffy is actually the one who started hating him first. Think about it. Crocodile was just sitting there, a warlord of the government, doing his villain job to perfection, plotting his coup in Alabasta, until the Straw Hat showed up, turned all of Baroque Works inside out, and took up Vivi's cause. So poor Croc had no choice. He had to put his plans on hold just to beat the Straw Hats senseless every single day. But nothing beats main character energy, and Luffy ended the career of one of the coolest warlords in the anime, at least for a while. Because a few months later, during the biggest war in years, Crocodile had 1,000 chances to wipe Luffy out in all that chaos. But not only did he not kill him, he actually protected Ace. That's why Crocodile gets just 8%. Now, Buggy is a special case, because his hatred for Luffy was basically inherited. To him, looking at the Straw Hat is like looking at a younger Shanks. And Buggy, who spent his entire life watching the red-haired beat him at everything, now has to deal with a new generation where, guess what? There's another brat with that same cursed hat who also outclasses him at everything. The guy even tried to execute Luffy back in Logtown, had a whole audience and everything, and only failed to chop his head off thanks to divine intervention. And today, they're both emperors now. Except while Luffy is out there challenging the entire world, Buggy is getting beat up worse than I did when my mom found out I skipped school. That's why the clown gets 13%. But the next one is no laughing matter.
Yup, we're talking about Smoker, the smiliest vice admiral in the whole anime, sitting at 18% hatred for the Straw Hat. And he was one of the first in the Marines to notice something really important. Luffy reminds him way too much of Roger, and that terrifies him, because the last time a guy like that showed up, it kicked off the Great Pirate Era. So Smoker knows that if Roger started all of this, the Straw Hat might do something even worse. That's why he latched onto Luffy, dropped everything, and headed to the Grand Line to hunt our captain down. The problem is, someone always shows up to ruin it. If it's not Daddy Dragon with that big gust of wind, it's the fire-breathing brother. And when it's neither of those two, Hancock comes flying in with a kick. And the worst part is, on top of taking the credit for Crocodile's downfall, Smoker even got his own life saved by Luffy, which nearly gave the Vice Admiral a heart attack. Because if Luffy isn't the villain he's been chasing this whole time, then everything Smoker believes about the Marines is wrong. And that he just can't accept.
Now, this Admiral's case is a curious one, because if you asked Kizaru whether he hates the Straw Hat, he'd probably tell you no. But the facts tell a different story. He took part in the second worst day of Luffy's life, when Luffy thought he'd lost his entire crew. Then, he was also there for the worst day of all, back in Marineford. And while Ace was dying right in front of the Straw Hat, Borsalino looked downright bored in the middle of all that chaos, completely indifferent to whether the one dying was a Marine or a pirate. And back in Egghead, we found out he's willing to kill even his own best friend if that's what the world government wants. So even though he's not running around screaming that he wants Luffy dead, you really can't trust the Dexter of One Piece. That's why Kizaru gets 24%.
Now pay attention to this poor victim right here.
Kaido, bless him, all he wanted was to invade a country, build a souped-up army with artificial devil fruits, and terrorize the whole world on his hunt for the One Piece. But then along comes Luffy, the Dream Eater. He adopts Momonosuke, the heir of Wano, as his protege. Then he destroys the Smile Factory, locks up Kaido's supplier, and even kidnaps his scientist. And as if that wasn't enough, he rounds up a crew and marches straight to Onigashima to start a civil war, one that ends with Kaido's empire in ruins and the horned guy's MILF hitting rock bottom. So yeah, my dude, Kaido has every reason to hate the Straw Hat. The kid literally took away everything the Emperor spent his whole life building. That's why he gets 30%. Next up is Caesar. And honestly, this man suffered worse than a Cleveland Browns fan at the hands of our captain. First, the Pirate Alliance storms his lab, destroys everything, and drags the guy off as a prisoner. Then the tour begins. He gets dragged through Dressrosa, through Zoo, and over in Total Land, he's even forced into a suicide mission against Big Mom, which, of course, didn't exactly go well. All Caesar ever wanted was to surpass Vegapunk and become the greatest scientist in the world. Then Luffy showed up, torched the man's career, and put him in the crosshairs of one of the most dangerous pirates on the planet. So, very well deserved, Caesar gets 38%. Now, Hody Jones. This one's got hate to spare. The guy spent his entire life hating humans, years building a plan to launch a new era where fishmen would stomp all over humanity. Everything was going exactly according to hate until, of course, Luffy showed up. A human who stands up for fishmen, who comes along saying everyone should eat together, that it's all about loud music and partying.
And that's when it got personal, my friend. Hody started a revolution, kidnapped the royal family, and was already out there giving political speeches in the town square when Luffy shows up. And after betraying his own people and nearly destroying the entire island, all Hody got out of it was one of the worst beatdowns of his life, plus living with the side effects of the very drugs he pumped into himself. That's why Hody gets 45%. Next is Magellan. At 52% hatred for Luffy, the man who had only one mission: keep Impel Down locked down. And look, the guy was good at his job. The most secure prison in the world. Impenetrable. The pride of his entire life. Then, guess who shows up? Yup, the Straw Hat breaks into the prison to save Ace. And in the process, he frees Crocodile, frees Jinbei, lets half the world loose, and kicks off a full-blown riot inside. And here's the most ironic part, my friend. Magellan actually did defeat Luffy, but it didn't matter one bit because the damage was already done. The guy won the battle and still lost the war. The warden's lifelong dream was to say nobody had ever escaped him, and Luffy ended that dream for good. Up next, we've got her, Granny. Just kidding. Big Mom. And her hatred for Luffy started on May 14th, back on Fishman Island, when Luffy tore up the deal that kept the candy flowing to the old lady and then put the whole island under his own protection. And as someone who's addicted to sweets myself, I can confirm that is a declaration of war. But the real hatred kicked in when the Straw Hat crashed the tea party, wrecked the wedding, blew up the cake, shattered the portrait of Mother Carmel, the most precious thing that old lady owned. As if that wasn't enough, made Jinbei hand in his resignation to join his crew. And that's when Big Mom became obsessed with Luffy, my friend. She swallowed her own pride, made peace with Kaido, and chased Luffy all the way to Wano just to put an end to this story once and for all. That's why she gets 60%. Next up is Rob Lucci, the John Wick of the world government, and he faced Luffy in one of the most brutal duels in the entire anime. He made our captain bleed, made him sacrifice years off his own life just to pull out the win. And that's where the story gets interesting, my friend, because after years of preparing, training, waiting for the day to prove that loss was just a fluke, Lucci comes back. And in Egghead, he runs into Luffy again, rocking that full Emperor drip. He calls him out for a 1v1 and gets the biggest scare in the whole anime.
The little kitty found out that Luffy is on a completely different level. That while he was pushing himself to the absolute limit, the Straw Hat was just having fun. But believe me, that defeat wasn't even the worst part. Lucci's humiliation ends when at the close of the battle, the one who finally takes him down is Zoro, Luffy's right-hand man. Those same brats who once stormed Eni's lobby have grown so much that the captain didn't even have to worry about him. After after everything, all the training, all the obsession, Lucci wasn't even a match for the crew's first mate. And the cherry on top of the despair, he's still alive. Alive to watch the whole crew climb to the top of the world while he stays exactly where he's always been. That's why Rob Lucci gets 72%. Now we've got him! Doflamingo, one of the greatest entrepreneurs in this whole anime. Smart as ever, he tried everything to avoid getting into trouble with the show's main character. The problem, my friends, is that Luffy had already heard through the grapevine that Mingo was running a reign of terror in Dressrosa, and then Rebecca comes along to say he ruined her whole life. So you can already picture where this is going, right? After all, helping a sad woman and saving a country in crisis is just another Tuesday in Luffy's life. So even though he never did a single thing to the Straw Hat, Mingo landed on the blacklist. Our poor businessman spent decades building an empire, and Luffy rolls in like the IRS and demolishes years of business in one afternoon. Kid wrecked the factory, freed the country, exposed the entire scheme, and shipped Mingo straight to Impel Down. And today, Daffy spends his days trying to figure out how he lost everything so fast. That's why he gets 82%.
And now, with 95% hatred for our captain, we've got him! Emu, the great villain of this whole story, at least so far. This being has been alive since the Void Century, over 800 years ago. Way back then, he had a massive beef with Joy Boy. And just when he was about to finally get over it, Luffy awakens Gear 5, complete with white hair, Zunisha roaring, and the whole top of the world realizing that the man is back. So Emu sends poor Saturn off to Egghead with one simple mission: kill Vegapunk and confront Joy Boy. But as you already know, nothing survives main character energy.
And even without having what it takes to beat a Gorosei, Luffy not only humiliated Saturn, but stood toe-to-toe with all 5 elders and walked off the island laughing. And that's when Emu reveals just how deep his hatred runs. He executes poor Saturn, an ally of centuries, for letting Luffy slip away, proving that nobody is safe when the subject is Joy Boy. And finally, we've reached him, number 1, the absolute champion of hatred, Admiral Sakazuki. And here, my friend, the hatred runs both ways. On one side, a kid who wants nothing more than to be free, and on the other, a stone-cold old hardliner who wants nothing but control and order. And you can feel his blood pressure spike every single time he sees a Straw Hat. But the real problem started in Marineford. What irritated Akainu most wasn't the Pirate King's son being executed, and certainly not an emperor flipping the island inside out. No, it was a brat barging into the war, going head-to-head with the very justice he stands for, showing that the new generation isn't afraid to make a stand. And, well, you already know how it goes. It was hate at first sight.
And that's when it got personal, when Akainu took aim at Luffy to snuff out the flame of the new generation right then and there. Ace threw himself in the way and died in his brother's place. And that's why, my friend, out of every single name on this list, all of them, nobody has ever wounded the Straw Hat the way Sakazuki did. He left a scar so deep in Luffy that he nearly gave up on his dream. But 2 years later, Akainu is Fleet Admiral, and Luffy is just a few steps away from the top of the pirate world. Opposite ends of the same world, getting closer and closer to finally colliding. The Admiral managed to burn out Ace's Vivre card, but what he lit inside Luffy was the very flame needed to wipe this world's false justice off the map for good. And the Straw Hat isn't the only one. Every single character in One Piece has a weak spot you should never poke, or else they turn into absolute monsters. And if you want to know exactly what you should never do around them, click this video right here and I'll tell you everything. Hope you all had fun, folks. Drop a like and I'll see you in the next video.